Good evening, everybody. It is 6:02 p.m. on the 16th of March, 2023. It's the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. I am Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. With me tonight is the Vice Chair, Amelia Aboff, the clerk, Erin Gino, Jahan Habib, Luke Schuster, and Debbie Howard Easton. I will go to the agenda now. Because pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Act of 2022, this meeting of the Somerville Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded. The Planning Board has a number of items on its agenda this evening. One is general business, which is an approval of meeting minutes, and we have a number of public hearings. One is 200 McGrath Highway. One is 256 to 260 Elm Street. Next is 270 Elm Street. And the next is 620 Broadway. So what I'm going to do is take up the meeting minutes first. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the draft minutes of December 15th, 2022? Does anybody have any comments? Suggestions for revision on the draft minutes of December 15th? Seeing none, the chair moves to approve the draft minutes as the minutes of the planning board, seconded by the vice chair. I'd like Emily to please call the roll.
This is Emily Hutchings taking the roll. Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
Okay. We have a unanimous vote, and we now have meeting minutes. Congratulations, everybody. The next item on the agenda that I will take up is 620 Broadway. My understanding that the applicant is requesting continuance, but I would like to ask the clerk of the planning board to please read into the record the notice of public hearing for that item.
620 Broadway, P&Z 21-145. 620 Broadway LLC proposes to develop a one-story commercial building and establish a cannabis retail sales use in the Commercial Core 5 district, which requires a site plan approval and a special permit.
Emily, it's my understanding that the applicant has requested a continuance to the April 6th meeting. Is that correct?
This is Emily Hutchings. That is correct.
The chair moves to continue that agenda item to April 6th, seconded by Amelia. I'll ask Emily to please call the roll.
Michael Capuano.
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
Erin Gino.
Aye.
Jahan Habib.
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton.
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
The agenda item is continued. The next item that I will take up is, sorry, I lost my sheet here, is 200 McGrath Highway. I don't know if the applicant for 200 McGrath is here, but it's also my understanding that this applicant will be or has requested a continuance. Is that right, Emily?
This is Emily again. That is correct. I did just promote Greg Karczewski for the applicant, so he can speak on this if you would like.
Sure, absolutely. Can I, actually, before we continue, Amelia, rather, do you need to step away?
I will recuse myself for a moment. Please let me know when to return. Thank you.
Okay. Let Amelia close out, and we can continue with the applicant for 200 McGrath, please.
Good evening, Chair Capuano, members of the planning board. This is Greg Karczewski representing the applicant for the 200 McGrath project. I'm here in person to request a continuance to the next meeting in April. There's been some, as a follow-up to our last meeting, I think there's been some community dialogue happening. We want to give a little bit more time for that to occur. So, I would appreciate the board's granting that continuance.
For sure, I certainly appreciate the request for continuance, and I very much respect the reason for it, for additional community engagement. So with that in mind, I will move to continue 200 McGrath Highway to the April 6th meeting, seconded by Aaron. I'd like Emily to please call the roll.
Michael Capuano,
Aye.
Aaron Gino,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Great. That item is continued April 6th. The last item on our agenda was one that was previously opened and presented. We did open, and it is 256 to 260 Elm Street and 270 Elm Street. So what I did for the benefit of the meeting, for anybody that is in attendance that was not present at the last meeting, there had not been a formal recommendation yet. So I had opened it. I had let the applicant present. We took some testimony. I encourage people in the audience and in the community to either present their testimony at the last meeting or again this evening, now that we've got a staff memorandum with recommendations, which is new information to the planning board. In addition, the applicant has resubmitted certain parts of their application per the request of the planning board to be a little bit more cohesive. And that is also additional new information that would, under the rules and regs of the planning board, generate a reopening of public testimony. So what I would like to do now is, Emily, I don't know.
Excuse me,
if you had-
Mr. Chair. I think
Oh, yes,
Amelia
we
needs
should-
to come back in.
We should definitely reach out to Amelia. Sorry, my bad. You want me to text her up? Sorry, everybody. We're waiting for Amelia to rejoin, which is easier when we're in person and less so when we're not.
And Mr. Chair, in the interim, I have promoted the applicant or the representative of the applicant, Welch Lyles, as a panelist.
For the record, Amelia has rejoined the planning board, and I would invite the applicant to make any further presentation to the planning board and the public as they deem necessary and appropriate. I will say that we did have a pretty thorough presentation on this application a few meetings ago, and planning board did engage in some discussion with the applicant and staff on this. So I would invite the applicant to address the board on any changes that may have occurred between last meeting and this meeting, and anything else that they would like to raise, please.
Thank you, Chair Capuano and members of the planning board. This is Welch Lyles with Asana Partners. We are the applicant and property owner. I'm also joined tonight by Ryan Curlbaum and Gautam Sundaram with Perkins and Will, and then also Chris Wesser and Scott Rickard with Lincoln Property Company. I would ask that we could also unmute them if possible. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if anybody else is.
I am as well.
Mr. Lyles, this is Emily Hutchings. I'm sorry, could you restate the last two names?
Chris Wesser and Scott Rickard with Lincoln Property Company. Those gentlemen will be helping me present this evening.
Thank you very much. I have made all 4 members of the team panelists, so they should be able to join. And if any of them need to present, they can let me know and I can make that possible.
That's
Hi,
great.
Emily. This is Ryan from Perkins & Will. Do you mind allowing me to present, please?
Absolutely. Just one moment.
Yes, is there additional presentation, or do you want to present from the other week? Either way, it's
Sure.
fine.
So while we're pulling that up, we were hoping to spend this evening addressing the questions that we heard and that were presented during our meeting on the 2nd. We have spent the past couple of weeks working with staff and our team to organize the documents, get everything cleaned up, and hopefully, present something that is a little more cohesive based off some of the comments that we received. And so everything has been resubmitted and organized, and then we thought we could then go through and address some of the more specific questions that were posed regarding the project, and then open up to any other questions that you guys might have. So with that, we're ready to jump right in. Sorry, one second. So starting with 256 and 260 Elm Street, which is the lab building portion of the project, we heard from you all that there was confusion on project phasing and there needed clarity on the square footage. We also wanted to take some time to discuss how Asana Partners is confident in both our design and operation of the lab structure, discuss some more about the loading and truck use, provide information on the green score, and then show additional studies that were done related to the architectural cornice, and then also tenants' opportunity for signage and customizing their storefronts. And this is to address some of the open questions that were brought up at the end of last week, like we discussed. So jumping right into the phasing, we understand
Hey, Will,
that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are you guys seeing my screen? Because I'm getting a white screen.
There it is now. It's come up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
about that.
I can see a graphic now.
Forgive me.
Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, keep going.
So as we discussed last week, the entire project and mainly the plaza area that we have been referring to as the seventh spoke, and that's meant to kind of encompass what is the 2 existing buildings, the plaza area, and what will be the new development, which is shown on this page as Lot 4. So both that Lot 4 development and the plaza have been referred to as a phase 2, and is kind of the combined project that we're reviewing this evening. Phase 1, that is primarily referred to in the TIA and the mobility management plan, is addressing 58 Day Street, which was the existing 4-story building that will be neighboring and also open onto the plaza. And again, has been left out of the specifics of a lot of these presentations because it is a different address. The work being done was a redevelopment and repositioning of the existing building only, and therefore didn't require the full land planning approval process. From a work and construction perspective, that building has a building permit, but we would proceed with the work there in tandem with the phase 2 or the 256 Elm, 270 Elm improvements. And they would all be completed about the same time. I hope that helps to provide some more clarity. I didn't know if there's any questions or further questions related to that.
Is there anything in addition that that's going to be presented by the team? Because I think it makes sense for
Sure, we
everything
can
you
go
want
through
to
the entire
present
thing
to
quickly.
everybody to come out so we can have a more comprehensive discussion.
Moving on, we also wanted to clarify the square footage and program allocation. This slide helps to kind of break that down. The gross square footage of the building will be 104,498 square feet. That incorporates the 4 levels of the primary building. There's also a partial basement that will be occupiable and usable, which will include building amenities, some retail space, and some ACE areas, as well as the penthouse space, which will be somewhat occupiable, and the rest will be equipment and facilities. And then there's also a discrepancy that you've seen, or I guess the delta that can be seen with the 87,574 is our total leasable area that has been used and referenced in the MEP, MMP, TIA, and some other sections. And so we wanted to just clarify that, the breakdown. So again, 104,000 total square feet. A space will total 5,984 square feet, which is just shy of 6% of the total building, and meets the CC4 requirements. We also have just over 18,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor, which you can see programmed in purple. And then the remainder of the building will be lab or office ready. It's being designed as a 60-40 potential split, and then the remainder will be service in common. Moving on to our next portion, a question and concern was brought up with Asana Partners and our experience as a lab operator and experience in designing and operating the building. And we wanted to, as part of that, really bring in some of our teams. While Asana Partners is not primarily known for its life science developments, we do have experience in the Durham market, experience here, and we also have surrounded ourselves with a team of experts who do have great experience, both from a design perspective with Perkins and Will and the team that they have put together with RFS, and then also with Lincoln Property Company, who is our operating partner and property manager. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm joined tonight by 2 members of that team who I'd love to introduce right now. So Chris Wesser and Scott Rickard, who run their project management operations for life science in the Boston area. And they can kind of speak more to their experience and kind of how we'll be specifically managing this building to ensure that there's no impact to Davis Square.
Good evening. This is Scott Rickards, Vice President of Property Management with Lincoln Property Company. Been with Lincoln for 11 years, and Lincoln and Asana have been working together in the Boston, Somerville, Cambridge area for 5 years. We manage over 400,000 square feet of office and retail space for Asana. And we also manage an additional 1 million square feet of real estate for Asana and other markets, including Dallas, New Jersey, New York. We've been managing life science in this market for over 20 years in the greater Boston area. And I'll introduce Chris Wesson, who runs our life science team in this market.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, members of the board. As Scott said, my name is Chris Wesson, Vice President of Life Sciences Management for Lincoln Property Company. And just to give you a little bit of a background about us and sort of our operation in the area with respect to life sciences, as Scott mentioned, we've been running life sciences projects in the Boston area for about 20 years. And our current lab footprint is roughly about 32 assets, just a tick under 5 million square feet, 4.7 to be exact. And we do this with a dedicated operations and management team. Currently, that's 46 dedicated individuals over our executive property managers and engineering team. So a dedicated group of people whose sole responsibility is life science operations. Specific to Somerville, you may be familiar, of course, with a couple projects which we're already engaged with at Boynton Yards, currently operating. We have a team in place over there working on that asset as it continues to develop and operate in Somerville. And also, we're currently consulting on the development of 100 Chestnut Street, and we'll be operating that project as well later this year once that property becomes operational. In the area, we also, not Somerville specific, but in the area, we also have a critical mass of folks in Charlestown at Hood Park, so not too far as the crow flies. So a good deal of professionals in this area, specifically dealing with life science product. So all this is to say that we're very familiar with lab operations in general, but also specifically in Somerville as it pertains to some of these assets. So we're excited to partner with Asana on this project. We certainly know them very well, and hope that gives the board some confidence in the operations of this property specifically. Welch?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Scott. One other thing that was brought up was related to the loading and the actual use of an SU-30 truck. I know, Chris, with your experience, would you mind touching on that some and speak to how, based off lab operations and kind of their standard uses, how that truck size actually fits well from an operational perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I think what we've found in our experience, in Somerville, but certainly elsewhere as well, is that lab operators tend to, the deliveries that they do take are usually smaller operators with very specific uses and specific operations inside of any given space. So as we reviewed this, we do feel that the space that's been allocated for loading, managed appropriately, is appropriate given the footprint of the asset and some of the uses inside.
And then the location of the loading dock, again, kind of jumping ahead to that, has been in accordance with our traffic impact studies. And like we talked about, we'll be working on, how to screen that, create murals and wall art so that when it is not in operation, it will, actually be a benefit in addition to the community and won't feel like a back of house loading dock area. Thanks again to Chris and Scott. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Ryan and the Perkins and Will team to help address some of the more specific architectural details.
Thank you, Welch. Planning board, please forgive me. The PDF is being a little crazy. Let me just touch on 3 more slides, and then we'd like to get your comments on the building portion and any other questions we might be able to answer. The first question came up about the green score and how we really providing more information about how we came to the 0.21 compliant green score. This came after several meetings with RISA and also, of course, with PSUF, working closely with Courtney, understanding how a zero lot line building could achieve the green score. It wasn't easy, to be quite honest. However, we've introduced a kind of permeable paving zone, like much of the Thruwak Plaza is in kind with making sure we're treating stormwater and meeting that credit that way. We've introduced 3 trees onto the site, 2 framing the entry from the Herbert Street side, and then an additional tree complementing the street trees on the planned south side. And probably the biggest contribution that we feel like the project's making is this 6,300 square foot green roof that basically wraps around the perimeter of the mechanical penthouse. Again, we've worked, this is an American Hydrotech product, and we will work with them quite closely to make sure we can get as many native species as possible into that sedum carpet. Wait for it. Having some issues with this PDF. It was working just fine, I promise. I'll come back to this one. There we go. Thanks for being patient. And someone else had mentioned in the last planning board meeting about the investigation of what the architectural cornice could become. This is something we've actually worked quite closely with the folks at Davis Now. We've had 3 separate meetings with them. They raised the very same issue. We've done a number of studies of what that cornice could be, whether or not these piers are pushing in, pushing out, whether you kind of put an exaggerated or kind of thickened black coping over the top. And we really felt like the project benefited from a kind of cornice or coping detail that was a little more modern, not something that necessarily was replicating the historic, but again, kind of introducing a more contemporary interpretation of what a cornice could become. And in our case, we've introduced this thin black aluminum coping that extends beyond the edge of the roof, and then set back the brick panels in alternating patterns above the windows, which we think will be a very elegant detail in the way the which light kind of rakes across the plaza facade. So we think that will be a very nice articulation in a kind of modern way. And then finally, before we open it up for questions for you all, we received the prompt last time about talking about how retail tenants signage and opportunities for signage could work. This is something I think Welch, you can speak to also, but the way in which retail tenants can engage their project, we are offering a number of ways in which that signage could happen, whether it's a kind of horizontal blade sign, again, all in compliance with the Somerville zoning, whether it's a fascia that's dedicated for tenants. You can imagine there could be frit on the glass, a horizontal sign band. There's a number of different ways this might happen. And, of course, we would work very closely with the tenants to make sure that this is very complementary to Davis Square. So that is the end, Chairman Capiano, of the building portion before we go into the through Black Plaza. If you'd like me to stop there, we're happy to do that before I turn it over to Gautam Sundaram.
So I think it makes sense because last time we had kind of an overall presentation. I think it makes sense to continue with that so that the board and the public can get a comprehensive view of kind of the entirety of both applications.
Okay. Good evening, planning board members and chairman. My name is Gautam Sundaram, principal and a landscape architect at Perkins & Will. And so I'll walk you through some of the comments that we've received and providing more clarification on those items. So the comments we heard were to provide more detail on the planting, specifically to highlight the native planting that we currently have in the project. And so we're going to share with you what were some of the details included about that. Additionally, further details on the open space as we look at the types of furnishings and different elements that help animate the overall plaza. There was also a comment made on potentially including some green walls. And so we want to talk to you about how we're thinking about those types of elements in a more holistic manner as part of an art and cultural aspect. There was some clarification or maybe confusion between an older rendering that showed a canopy to where we are today. So I'll provide some clarification on that too. And then discussions on some of the configurations where we showed how the plaza could be programmed. There were questions raised that would that impede any of the accessibility routes, and we have details to diagram and show you that it does not impede any of those types of accessibility routes. In fact, we want to make sure that the whole plaza is accessible. And then Walsh will also discuss and share with you thoughts on the overall maintenance plan for the landscape, and also some of the discussions ongoing with what is a dedicated space to the tenants from the civic space itself. So those are all the comments we heard, and we'll start with providing additional detail on planting, and I'll start with the trees. We always and very consistent with what is recommended in the urban forestry guidelines for the city of Somerville is promote biodiversity. And so looking at different species of trees based on its program and function of what we're expecting, but also looking at it from a shade analysis that was done previously and shared in the past presentations too. So we're proposing 3 honey locust trees, which are more towards the page north of the plaza. These trees are very good and great urban trees that provide shade and larger canopies. And the idea is to create spaces for seating below those, so they'll be providing a great function for that. That's highlighted as A. Additionally, what's highlighted as B, which is towards the entrance of the Herbert Street Plaza, we are proposing gray birches on either side of the plaza, sort of flanking in planted zones. And that will help sort of also work within the planting areas that we have, and we know we have the adequate planting soil as well, as that has been calculated based on the types of tree species. In addition, we have a series of black gums, which is highlighted as C, along the street trees along Herbert Street. These are great street trees that provide shade and provide many benefits from an urban heat island aspect as well, and are considered strong urban trees as well. The birch tree is also proposed at the corner, the southeast corner of the building that Ryan had previously highlighted as well. And so all in all, proposing a sort of a mix of different types of urban trees that we know will do well with these urban conditions, but also taking into account some of the environmental conditions too, like shade and other aspects. We've also made sure that all of these trees are within a strong planting zone, and it is a significant planting soil as well to help promote the long-term growth of these trees. So now when we start to move to the next layer down, is to really look at a rich mix of perennials and ground covers to really start to create a strong understory. And so in here, it's a mix of different types of species. What's highlighted in yellow are the native species, and what's highlighted in, which are not highlighted, are other types of species. But so if you ask me, why did you go with all of native species? Here is where we really are very careful to make sure that the species that we recommend are going to work in the shade and under the canopy of the trees, but also within the shadow. So that's why the mix of plant species has been looking at native species and other very shade tolerant species as well. Of course, we are exceeding the requirements that are outlined, but we wanted to, also make sure that we are able to have this rich medium of plant mix and biodiversity there. And you'll see more of this as we go into some of the views. It'll sort of be a little bit more clearer. So this is a view that you previously saw in our last presentation, which looked at the plaza itself. So this is one of the bigger planters, which is closer towards Elm Street. So we have the 3 honey locust trees that are highlighted at the top. And then at the understore planting, we have a series of different types of hostas and ferns. And again, here we're highlighting the mix of the amount of native species over here. And then in addition to that planting mix, we also have a series of ground covers as well that highlight the Canadian wild gingers, black huckleberry, periwinkle as well, which all do very well in urban conditions and in shaded spaces too. Second is now looking at this also from a different season aspect, and so in what would be some of the seasonal aspects and colors. So this is looking at the view from Herbert Street towards the plaza. So as I mentioned, the gray birches on either side in planters, sort of framing the entrance towards the plaza. But at the ground cover, there would be a mix of different types of hostas, ferns as well, and then different types of ground covers like the wild ginger, huckleberry, and periwinkle. So we've developed a matrix that we know is going to work within the shaded zones, but also trying not to introduce too many different types of species, but trying to maintain some type of a matrix that would be replicated between all of the different planters. Next slide. And so then as we start to look at other different types of elements within the plaza, there's been a lot of attention as we think about not just the building materials, but also the landscape materials in introducing elements that will also add to the animation of space through its sculptural design. So using different types of wood, adding elements of accent like color, adding opportunities where they're backless or facing each other, and really working within a consistent vocabulary of different types of elements that really try to create diverse types of ways of experiencing and appreciating the plaza and the spaces themselves. Here you can see some of the pervious paving and also juxtaposed against some of the landscape materials where we have an edge, it will be built in granite, or the benches, which will be wood and metal. Next slide, please. While it's coming up, there was a discussion that was proposed about introduction of green walls, and this is something that we have discussed as well as as we talked about the overall project. But we also talked a lot about other ways that we could incorporate art and other cultural elements that really start to become a way of how we start to think about other spaces. And Welsh and Asana have made a commitment to allocate a certain number of funds that would really be engaging with the artist community. And so whether it is a green wall or whether it's an art element that could be part of ways of creating murals or a way of engaging with much more of the Somerville arts community, we want to make sure that those elements are part of that. And so what we are proposing here is showing you different precedents of and opportunities where a green wall could be accommodated, whether it's along the edge of the wall, along the stairs, or along the facade of the existing buildings. And we think there are many opportunities, but through this program that Welsh has and the Asana partners have set aside, we feel that we will be able to create some opportunities for us to incorporate these types of elements in the project as well. And those commitments have been made. The next item was a clarification on an older rendering that reflected a canopy, which you can see on the top left-hand corner. And through many discussions that we've had with the neighborhood, with the UDC members, we've moved away from having that type of a canopy or a trellis structure to be something that's much more open to sky, but has the catenary lights to really help sort of bring that type of ambience. And so that was more of a remnant from an older rendering. And what you see on the right-hand side is the correct rendering with the current conditions as proposed, that it would be open to sky. The next was to make sure that we are not impeding on any of the accessible routes through the plaza in any of the different types of programming events that we would have. So what you see on the bottom left are a series of different ways of how the plaza could be programmed, whether it was a food market or whether it's a much larger food festival, or there was a series of sculptural elements. And so when you look at the plan, the length of the ramp that allows us to get from grade of Herbert Street to the finished grade of the plaza is 36 feet, which is highlighted in pink below. And from that point on, the entire plaza is flush with multiple accessible routes, whether you're going to the building entrances or whether you're going towards Elm Street, or you're going to any of these different types of programming elements that we have to make sure that there is equal access for all to the entire plaza, that everybody has the same experience about how the plaza is programmed, but also has this ability to move across. So having that type of a conscious way of sort of articulating the circulation was very critical for us. And so we're highlighting that in any different configuration, we would still be maintaining the ADA accessibility. Getting close to the end. So the next slide. We'll speak, and Welsh, if you don't mind talking about some of the maintenance plans for the landscape and the plaza.
Happy to. Yeah, so we are, as I mentioned last meeting, we are working with the city of Somerville on all of the documents related to easements for the Civic Plaza, as well as a landscape maintenance and management plan that is being put together in detail based off the city's standard guidelines. And so it would be approved by the city of Somerville, but will include all standard operations such as trash, recycling, snow removal, and then we'll also plan to have security that will be maintaining and patrolling this area for safety levels on a regular basis. And we're happy to share those guidelines if necessary, and again are working to complete all of those also along with the development covenants for the property. And then lastly, speaking to the portion regarding tenant dedicated areas within the plaza space, there are 2 tenants who are existing who have, yes, contractual lease obligations to the patio. Chipotle, who's existing, has 356 square feet minimum, which is outlined here. Starbucks has 275 square feet minimum. Their area that they'll be getting is actually larger than that, just to clarify, right, that it's shown. But it's actually also all falls under the building footprint and actually does not fall into the Civic Plaza area. The only other tenant would be the corner of the plaza and Herbert Street, to which we're proposing a small dedicated patio area out front if that were to be a restaurant. It's being designed to have restaurant capabilities, but as of today, I don't know what that use might be. So we're still actively talking to lots of different users. But if it did go to a food and beverage user, we feel like that they would need some sort of outdoor space to accommodate that. I believe that touches on everything. We do have the presentation from last meeting as well, if we need to pull up anything from that. But with that, we'd love to open up to any other questions or comments.
I will have probably some comments at some point, but I'm going to reserve the majority of my comments and questions until after I hear from the public. But my question, one of my questions, and one I'll ask kind of first, is just because it's the most recent thing that you just presented, was the patio space for some of the existing tenants. And one of the tenants that you mentioned is Starbucks, which is obviously in the building that's going to be newly constructed. And I believe you said that they're moving to another space and will have greater patio access. Is that something that you, as the developer of a site that they're not going to be at, were they able to secure that? I'm just kind of curious because obviously that's a space that a lot of people enjoy using, and I'm kind of surprised that they were able to secure an outdoor space that's greater than what they had already as part of discussions with you.
Yes, sir. So they will be relocating temporarily while the project is under construction, and then moving back into the new project. Asana Partners also owns 240 Elm Street in Davis Square, and there is a small vacancy there that used to be occupied by another national coffee brand. And so Starbucks will be taking that space temporarily for construction. It doesn't have a patio, unfortunately, but they're making.
I see. I was a little bit confused.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so that's
no problem. Okay, I will have some additional questions and comments after public testimony, but I just wanted to kind of ask that when it was fresh on my mind. Does anybody else on the board have any comments or questions of the applicant at this time, or staff? Seeing none, what I'm going to do is open up the hearing to public testimony. I see that there are a number of people in the virtual audience here, and if you would like to present on well, actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open it up first for the building and then for the civic space portion, because they're 2 separate applications. And I think that for the purpose of the meeting minutes, it makes sense to separate them, because for the benefit of a clean record. So I will open it up for the building portion itself, which has already been presented. So if anybody would like to testify in support of the application of the building, I would invite you to please raise your hand, and I'll call on you in the order in which I see you. We don't have a ton of people here, so I'm not going to put a 2-minute timer up, but I would ask that you just be mindful of the fact that there may be additional people who want to speak. I will also be leaving the written record open because obviously this is a very significant parcel in a very prominent location. So I want to make sure the planning board has as much opportunity to hear from the public as it can before it takes a vote on this. So we won't be voting on this project this evening, but I will be leaving the written comment open for a few weeks. And we'll bring it back up in April, likely for discussion and consideration for a vote then. So if anybody wants to speak in favor of the application for the building, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing and I'm going to open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition or otherwise express concern for the application for the building. Please raise your hand. I'm also mindful of the fact that it's the opening few days of March Madness, so people's attention in the public might be prioritized elsewhere outside of a planning board meeting. So that is another reason that I want to make sure that we hear from as many people as we can. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing and move on to testimony on the Civic Space Plaza. So anybody that wants to speak in support of the application for the plaza, please raise your hand. Going once, going twice. Seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition of the application. And I see James Williamson, who has raised his hand, so I could request to have James Williamson please be unmuted. And for the purpose of the record, please state your name and residential address for the record.
This is Emily Hutchings. James should be unmuted on his end. James, you will still need to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. So it's a little confusing, this format, because it said I was unmuted, but then I had to push another button. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So James Williamson, 30 Churchill Ave. Some of you may know that's about the equivalent of 2 long blocks down the hill from Teal Square over the line in Cambridge. I'm quite familiar with the Davis Square area and this area. I would just have a question. I've heard this described as a civic space, but the proponent or the applicant has talked about having private control over some portion of it or all of it, and some guidelines, quote unquote, that could be discussed or mentioned or presented if there were interest. Well, I would like to understand better in what sense it's a civic space. To me, a civic space is actually something that's civically controlled primarily, and a private space maybe has civic dimensions, but isn't exactly civic. So I'd just like to understand better who's going to be controlling the space and who's going to be setting the guidelines and what the anticipated guidelines are. And of course, once people have a chance to understand that better, maybe there will be some comments or some views about whether those are the best guidelines or not. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to speak in opposition or express concern for the application on this part of the project? Going once, going twice. I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing, and I will bring it back to discussion and questions by members of the board and the applicant and the staff. So to address Mr. Williamson's question, I would invite either the applicant or Emily to explain how the open space application, the through block plaza, is considered civic space, please.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I can speak to generally how privately owned civic space is addressed.
Yes,
in
please.
Somerville,
Yes.
this is not uncommon. We've had numerous applications for privately owned civic space that is publicly accessible over the last few years in particular. And so what typically occurs is there is a public access easement that guarantees this public space or this civic space will be permanently publicly accessible, and that it will remain civic space in perpetuity. There is also typically maintenance agreements that are that must be signed before any certificates of occupancy that have to be reviewed and approved by our Public Space and Urban Forestry Division, and whatever other relevant staff is necessary to confirm that the civic space complies with the city regulations for civic space and the city goals for open space and civic space in general.
Emily, could you explain a little bit about how the maintenance agreements work, how they are enforced?
You know, I don't have all of the information about how maintenance agreements are enforced. I know that Courtney Kirk, who is a senior planner with Public Space and Urban Forestry Division, is here with us this evening, and she might be able to provide additional information. And if not,
to the extent, yeah, for sure. But to the extent that Courtney is able and willing to educate the board and the public on this aspect of the application, I would certainly welcome her to be unmuted and educate us. And if we need some more time, like I said, we're going to be taking this back up in the first meeting in April. If you or she or Rice or whomever feels like you need a little bit more time to make a cogent answer.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's sometimes funny to be on the opposite side of the platform and just unsure if everything's going correctly. Hi, this is Courtney Kirk, Senior Planner in the Public Space and Urban Forestry Division. Just to let you all know how we've been working with private developers on these landscape management and maintenance plans is that we give them a rough set of guidelines that we expect them to develop, a seasonal approach to maintaining the plant material, as well as, you know, typical maintenance operations like the snow removal and the trash pickup. And specifically, our review of those documents is really trying to aim the maintenance towards the specificity of the design. So, you know, we're trying to get the right maintenance crew for the design that's being proposed. You know, it doesn't make sense to have a company that specializes in lawn care to manage a plaza like this. And also trying to have the teams tailor their maintenance so that they can support our Somerville public space goals in terms of, you know, appropriate maintenance for pollinators, to protect pollinators. You know, we're trying to align the maintenance to be up to speed with how we manage our public trees, so that we expect the maintenance crews to take care of the young trees, like we, city staff, take care of our public trees, as well as how we manage our parks tree health program. So we really want this plaza to be a long-standing amenity to the public. So that's, I think, probably a little bit of how we're reviewing these plans. And then, you know, this is pretty new, so we haven't had one of these spaces come online just yet. So in terms of enforcement, I think, you know, this will be a something that will probably come up if we get a lot of 311s about a space being unkempt. And also the Somerville zoning ordinance does outline specific landscape standards with requirement to, you know, plant beds being, you know, 90% full. So I think there are mechanisms in place that in the future, you know, we'll have capabilities to enforce landscapes that are not up to speed.
Thank you very much. That answers my question about that. I don't think anybody, while we've got Courtney here, we've got a couple of people. I saw Amelia's hand first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of questions, but I do have two that are about the open space specifically, and they're questions for staff, so I'd like to raise them now. One is, I'm sorry?
I said, yeah, go ahead.
One is, I'm pleased to see that so much of the plaza area includes permeable pavers, and I'm also aware that permeable pavers require, if not necessarily annual, then otherwise biannual, very regular maintenance in order to continue performing that function for stormwater and drainage. And can we confirm that maintenance of the permeable pavers to ensure their functionality is something that is included in that agreement? I'm not sure whether that belongs as a condition to our consideration or whether that's something to coordinate directly with PSEF staff. My other question is how the idea of a permanently accessible space and an agreement with the city to provide that as a permanently accessible easement would relate to the leased tenant space that was identified. I understand the Starbucks side would be within the footprint of the building, but the other looked like it was in the, what I understand to be public easement. So I'm not sure if those are questions for Emily or for Courtney, but would appreciate, and we can leave them for next time as well.
I think the first question would be for Courtney, but I can answer the second question. I'm not certain exactly how the easement will be addressed in reference to how vendors and how retailers will be able to use the space, but I think generally what would be in an easement is that there would be the ability to put out street furniture for retailers to be able to use the space, but it will be a public open space. So retailers would not have the ability to say to someone from the public, you need to move for our customers. Again, I'm not certain if that is the case or how that would be worked out. I know that the language is typically worked out with the legal department. And I can follow up with that for next time.
If I may, this is Welch Lyles with Asana Partners. Our conversations to date and understanding to date is that an additional license would be outlined for that area as part of the easement that would be in place for the tenancy. And then if a new tenant were to take over, a new license would be required. And so it would be an additional document that's outlined as part of that easement for that certain area.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Courtney Kirk from PSEF. Just to address the permeable pavement, you know, the paving surface maintenance would be one element in that landscape maintenance and management plan. And we've also been asking developers to include language in terms of long-term maintenance. Just as like an example, if Eversource has to come in and lay some new gas line through the middle of a civic space, that, it's expected that there be language in this plan to address, something that might come up 10, 20 years from now.
I just want to make sure, Amelia, did you have any additional questions or comments that you wanted to make at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay. I saw Debbie next, so Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my questions Amelia had addressed, which was to make sure that the paving maintenance is part of that landscape maintenance agreement. The other question I had, or just wanted to point out to staff, and I'm sure your legal department will be all over this, but to make sure that those agreements have pretty robust step-in rights for the city to actually maintain if the landlord's not maintaining in the way that they're supposed to, and ability to charge back. The other more of a staff question I had was around programming in the civic space. I mean, I know sort of, for example, during Art Beat, I know that's sort of a hot area where they have bands and things. Is it anticipated to be the same sort of, permitting or however that is managed in terms of activities that are going on in this space? Once it's, covered by this public easement, or how that sort of programming aspect is going to work going forward.
So we would intend to have a combination of building and then also public programming. We've already had early conversations with the farmers market that operates directly behind us, with an art group who's reached out regarding potential use for it. So I think it would be managed by Lincoln Properties, who will be our property manager again, and handling the maintenance of the space, and then private programming with the opportunities for public programming as people would reach out and reserve that area.
Thank you.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a two-part question. It's directed towards the applicant. The first part of the question is around construction management. Because of the location of this site, I'd love to get more thoughts on how the construction process will be managed. And as a subset question related to that was that the civic space and the building is considered part of phase 2. And it might be helpful for us to better understand what the timeframes might be in terms of the civic space construction versus the building. Is it simultaneous or sequential? I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Sure, happy to speak to that. So we are still developing the full construction and logistics plan for the project, but all of that will have to be blessed and in accordance with the engineering department and traffic impacts for that work. Our intention would be to close the Civic Plaza and build that with the building, and both would open at the same time at the end of construction. And we will work to ensure that we're limiting disruption as much as possible with that construction. It will be mostly done via lifts, so there will not be a crane on site. There is very minimal excavation, fortunately, because the basement is already existing and we're utilizing that existing footprint. So that will help to minimize trucks and hauling. And we will be able to maintain all lay down on site by using that Civic Plaza space to help minimize disturbance. So again, the exact details we're working through. We don't know the exact start of construction at this point. We have submitted for a demolition permit, and we'll be submitting for the full building permit shortly and going through that process. And then there's lots of other factors at play as to when we'd be able to start. But our goal would be hopefully by the end of this year.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to, as a follow-up, just add that certainly you have had neighborhood meetings, and I would ask you to keep the considerations of the neighbors, particularly the residential abutters, in mind with respect to the construction. I know that construction needs to happen. There will be noise and things that will occur, but if you could pay special consideration to the residents that are living there or living in abutting properties. So that's just more of a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the time.
Certainly, we definitely will.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments or questions? I see Luke.
Mr. Chair, this is just procedural, but acknowledging that I missed the meeting 2 weeks ago where this project was discussed. I watched the video of the full meeting and have submitted my affidavit to the planning staff. So
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'm glad you addressed that because it's not something that I thought of because I forgot that you were here. Okay. I do have a couple of comments and questions, but I also see Amelia has raised her hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of additional questions, and if you were looking to hold your comments to the end, I'll raise my other odds and ends now, if that's all right.
Yeah.
The applicant, I appreciate the clarification in tonight's presentation about the accessibility of the entire plaza area beyond the ramp. I think I might have misunderstood, and I wonder if you could clarify. It sounded like in the presentation that you gave at the previous meeting, you were calling out something special about the sort of continuous path that is visually distinct on your plans that goes down the center of the plaza, although you clarified tonight that was not the only ADA accessible route. Could you just go over whether there is something special happening on that path again, or whether that is strictly just a visual distinction in color?
Happy to clarify. Again, my name is Gautam Sundaram, landscape architect. And so this is consistent with what is happening as the design guidelines, is to make sure that the accessible route is of a permanent type of a finish, which is concrete sidewalks. And that has been highlighted to us by planning staff to make sure that and this also came up in the UDC comment, to make sure that the concrete pathway, which is an extension of the ramp, always maintains that accessible route. Because sometimes there have been concerns from neighbors and community users, that they feel that it's a tripling hazard. So we are making a special payment, which is an extension of the ramp, which continues all the way across from Herbert Street, that gives you the accessible pathway going towards Elm Street. In addition, the rest of the plaza is also flush, and it allows for all types of mobility for the entire plaza. So we're we're accommodating both, is what I'm saying.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I'm sorry, did the applicant have something to follow?
Yeah, this is Welch. I was going to say, just to add to that, the pavers will be properly maintained so that the entire plaza will be accessible at all times. But should something offset, there's that path that is unchangeable. And this mentality also aligns with our understanding of the new proposed sidewalks for Davis Square that are partially concrete and partially pavers.
Right. And my last comment again is Gautam Sundaram, is that this is consistent with what is also being defined as universal design guidelines. So while they may not be about code compliance, but these are design guidelines that we value as well.
Thank you. All right, so that does confirm my previous understanding that there is a special characteristic of that pathway that makes it more suitable for ADA access and for universal design standards. So with that in mind, I will give more thought to whether I will propose it as a condition, but I would really like you to give some thought to the fact that that path ought to be kept clear when you are programming this plaza. That is the intent of the design guidelines. That is the intent of the ordinance, I believe, and that sort of sidewalk condition that's being specified in proper public spaces. And I trust that you will keep the pavers in good shape, but I think that for many differently abled people who are sensitive to the texture and consistency of the street, it is important that we not put picnic tables or other activities sort of in that line that you have so carefully and articulately drawn across the site.
We would be happy to work language like that into our maintenance agreement to ensure that that stays clear.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Emily, I think, which is, could you please remind us of the biosafety committee's role in a project like this as it advances?
I will do my best, although I know Raisa has more background on this than I do. I believe they receive an application that is separate, that they review. And in terms of the workings of the lab space, and depending on the level of lab use, they then provide recommendations and feedback. Again, this is my trying to remember from the presentation that was provided a couple months ago, but I would be glad to go back and get that information and provide it for next time.
Thank you so much. I think that when we had that presentation, there were a few items in there that were still being considered or refined. And if there are any updates, and this may well be in Rice's court, about their process, it may be good to get, timely to get an update on sort of how they're imagining moving forward. I'm looking at Erin because I expect her to be the most knowledgeable of the panelists on this topic. And the last question I just wanted to raise is, I don't think that, and maybe they have been and I've missed them, but I believe the materials that were presented tonight are new content that has not been, that I don't think is available on the website yet. And if we are leaving written comment open, it would be great if we could make sure these materials are available to any members of the public who might be seeking to get a more robust understanding of the project. I think they answer a lot of questions that were raised in the meeting 2 weeks ago. So I appreciate staff and the applicant's help with that if that's possible.
Thank you. Just responding to that real quick. I believe they are up on the website, but I can go double check that.
No problem. I'm sure I'm a few days behind on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. I would ask for the applicant to put up, because some of my questions kind of involve, and my comments involve the plaza space. I wonder if we might be able to get that up as well. I know you just took it down. Specifically, I would love to see, not necessarily this slide, but it was also the overlay of the outdoor space that's proposed. Not by the outdoor space, I mean the outdoor seating space that we talked about earlier. Okay, great. My not concern. My question is, because we've kind of got some narrow spaces with the addition of this outdoor seating, are you intending to have that seating be kind of roped off or barricaded off, or will it just be open spaces? Because as you get through, as I kind of traverse the ADA accessible path that we just talked about, you do get, if somebody needs to use the path or chooses to use the path, and somebody who doesn't, it gets awfully tight in some of those spaces, kind of getting around it when you've also got potentially rope barriers or whatever around the outdoor seating space, and just making sure that there's enough opportunity to get through when there are a bunch of people who maybe using a wheelchair on the path, and so people aren't squeezing and moving people out of the way. I have no idea what the width is on some of the areas we're talking about. I'm wondering if you might be able to guide me through that.
Sure. So our intent would be to keep those open unless, I guess, alcohol laws would require them to be cordoned off, in which case that tenant, I think, would need to get a special use permit for that right. And so it could be addressed at that time, kind of what their layouts would be. So the Chipotle and Starbucks, which are committed, would be able to be open. And I believe we're maintaining a minimum 6-foot path of travel that's being shown around those highlighted areas, specifically the Chipotle one on the left, which I believe is the tighter of the two.
Yeah.
And the other tables are kind of just shown for diagrammatically for programming uses, and could be left tighter to the building to keep a larger area open by the accessible path of travel.
Thank you. And I wonder if we might be able to go back to the slide in the discussion on the concept of the green wall and vertical green space that had been raised both last meeting and this meeting. And I'm wondering if you have, so obviously I love the concept of green walls. The planning board has requested them in a number of different applications, and the hope that we might be able to get something like this, as well as the other plantings and greenery through that open space, I think would really, really enhance the experience of moving through it and using that space. So I would strongly hope that this is something that becomes a reality in that open space.
Yeah, we agree with you there. It creates a softness to the space that we really like, and it's appealing. I think our best opportunities are to find a way to use it on either side of the stair from Herbert Street. The other wall, there you go, thank you. So kind of under the trees and to the left, or to the right side of the stair there. And then that wall shown at 58 Day Street, we would actually urge against creating that as a green wall, just given the age of that building and the masonry. If we were to introduce the green wall of that, we're just worried of damage and water intrusion concerns. But
I think you mentioned that on that building you were considering some artwork. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, so we're considering art there. So we actually have 3 areas on 58 Day Street that we've identified for public art or for wall art. This location that's shown here, there's a location on Day Street that's currently a kind of loading area that we are identifying a wall. And then for those of you who are familiar with it, that existing building has a kind of tunnel passageway that leads to the plaza that today is less than inviting. And so we'll be adding lighting to make it feel very secure and inviting, and then art throughout that passageway so that it's kind of a fun experience and a found opportunity as you're walking into the plaza. And then on the 7th Spoke building itself, we've talked about wall art for the overhead door on Herbert Street. And then we also have wall space on the plan east-facing facade of the building that's been dedicated for art. It's currently mostly a blank masonry wall, given the fire code and the property lines there. And so we would work with local artists to program that to provide a mural over Davis Square, as well as maybe some potential for the backside of the 58 Day building.
Thank you. I actually had not thought about that passageway, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that will really enhance the experience of use and of safety, and the feeling of including both sides of the plaza, and the passageway through it. I also appreciate your comments on the idea of the trellis above the open space and your disinclination to do that. I remember when I asked you a couple of weeks ago about your shadow studies, one of the things that I recall was that the way the shadows fall would tend to be over the open space, and so adding stuff above might necessarily make it even darker than it otherwise would be with shadows. So I think that's definitely the right way to go. Those are kind of the comments and questions that I had. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they would like to raise at this time. I see Aaron's hand. I think you are muted. You're muted. Can't hear you. Is there a way, Aaron, maybe for you to call in on a phone? Okay. Wait, I'm hearing something. I don't know who that is.
Aaron, do you want to call me and I'll put you on speaker? It's worked in work context before. I just tried to do my.
Can we try now?
Okay.
Try to reach. Do I just have to be really?
I heard you for a second.
Me or?
Yes, I hear you.
I think it's my.
Yeah.
You can hear me now? I'm coming. Like magic. I did nothing except for try and type Amelia's number. So perhaps the fear of webinar, I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna be like uncomfortably close to my laptop here, and you guys are gonna get like a weird view of my face, but you'll be able to hear me, which is the important part. So OnCue had a couple questions actually about the lab building. So I had 3 here that I'm gonna kind of run through, and I'm happy to take responses for this later, but if they're quick and easy, we can. I invite the applicant team to respond to them today. So in particular, talking about a successful lab building, the first question is, what have you done to design the shell of this building to either a multi-tenant or a single tenant type use, specifically around how you're going to have the design of the building be able to comply with the Massachusetts hazardous waste requirements, and how you're going, so that's sort of part 1 of that building design question, hazardous waste. And then part 2 of that building design question for lab use is, you mentioned you believe the delivery program and the loading dock program could be successful if managed appropriately. And I would love to hear sort of your plan on what that appropriate management would look like, especially for multiple different retail uses plus a lab use and 1 loading dock. Those are my.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Do you have another question as well?
Nope, those are my key lab questions.
Great. So I can start, and then Chris and Scott, if you all are still on and want to add, please feel free. So from a hazardous and safety management perspective, so we have committed to only allow BSL 1 and 2 level users in this space, which just that commitment alone, I think, greatly reduces concern around the product uses and any type of hazardous materials associated with it. So while there obviously will still be chemicals of sorts, it will be at a much lighter level, and then we also will be utilizing a single pH neutralization system for the building that we will hold the permits and maintenance for, to help kind of limit the amount of exposure from that perspective. The building is currently being designed to where it could be a single user or up to 2 users per floor. And then kind of each of those uses would then, it's a shared hood system for each of those uses. And then any additional specialty hood would be tenant specific and required as an addition as part of their permit and that work. And to allow some flexibility there. And then we have, dedicated chemical storage spaces throughout the building that will meet all, fire separation requirements, and, space requirements. Chris, Scott, if there's anything else I've missed related to that question you'd like to address, feel free.
Sure. This is Chris Weston with Lincoln Property Company. Wells, I think you kind of covered it there. Just talking about pH specifically, it's a permit and application process we're very familiar with. We're doing it with a couple of assets now, so we would submit for that with the appropriate folks and maintain it with our own third-party providers when it comes to pH neutralization, compliance, and things like that. But onto your other question, Aaron, specifically on appropriately managed deliveries, I think, in our experience, what it comes down to is designing building rules and regulations, as well as tenant handbooks. Really, it's materials that are developed thoughtfully when thinking about the building, to ensure that tenants understand expectations in sort of the for lack of a better term, the rules of the road, so to speak, on how materials have to come in and out. But more specific to the loading dock, it's staffing it appropriately and using the right provider, typically with your site security, to manage an active loading dock in an urban area that is an area that you want to make sure is run efficiently, so that when deliveries are brought in, folks don't linger, you don't have things stacking up, and that really comes down to Lincoln Property Company managing the third-party security provider appropriately, and it's something we've done in the past, and we're certainly more than prepared to do in this case. So that's what I was referring to about managed appropriately. Really, it's about setting expectations and then an active management of that loading area.
Okay, no, that helps. And then just sort of following up, maybe few logistical questions, one for staff. On the BSL requirements, just based on what I heard here, it's BSL 1 and BSL 2. Could the applicant actually clarify if that's BSL 2 inclusive of BSL 2 plus?
We have not broken out that classification separately at this time, but can look into addressing that if we need to.
Yeah, and maybe a question for staff. If this building is designed, or maybe staff / applicant, if this building is designed to be applicable for BSL 1 and BSL 2, but not BSL 3, Somerville allows technically for BSL 3 as of current. What's the path to basically say, yes, this is a lab building that we approve of, that makes sense for BSL 1 and 2, but not 3 when we don't actually have an ordinance around that? Would that be a condition? Or I guess I just have concerns that, if we don't have something in place saying that we sort of talked about this in the context of BSL 1 and 2, and then 5 years from now it's like, oh, let's do BSL 3, and then the shell of the building isn't really appropriate to it.
That is a very good question, and I can go do some research and find the answer.
That would be fabulous. I realize it's sort of a multifaceted one, so just putting it out there now.
Yep, I can certainly see whether it would be a condition of approval for the planning board, or whether it would better fall under some other category. But I will go find the answer to that question for next time.
I'm wondering, based on Aaron's question, is that something that is there Is there a covenant in place here, and is that part of it? Because that's certainly something that could either be a condition or part of a covenant that is not something that's under the planning board's purview, but is certainly something that we can raise as a suggestion for the
Yes, sir. So
administration.
we do have a previously agreed to covenant that has been signed by the applicant, by us, but we are happy to modify that following this. There are some other pieces that basically need to be filled in to complete following planning approval. So we'd be happy to modify that to include that language.
Okay, to be clear, and I appreciate your response to the suggestion, that isn't something that the planning board can require you to do. You know, covenants are outside the jurisdiction of the planning board, but to the extent it is not something that's part of the covenant, it is also something that perhaps we can condition is to, on this particular application, to limit the level type. And I rely on Erin because I didn't know there was a 2+ either, and I don't know what the distinction is, and I rely on her expertise on this stuff to educate us and to ask these questions. But that is something that we can condition in addition to it being part of a covenant over which we do not have authority. Yes, Erin, were you through with your questions?
I have two very fast follow-ups, perhaps, just in response to the same situation, which is I would like to understand if the tenants would be required to work with Lincoln on hood placement, just based on the CFMs of the building. If you've got multi-tenants and sort of lab build-outs, I know that can get hairy. And then on the delivery part, I was wondering if you were planning to have the delivery address. This is just a comment. I've seen where if you have a delivery address on Elm Street, the delivery trucks might try and deliver on Elm Street. The delivery loading dock is actually on Herbert Street. So that's perhaps something to consider here. And those are my follow-ups. I know Amelia has something that's probably related to the lab level.
Yes. If I may, Mr. Chair, I know that in terms of process and what tools we may have to consider that, I know that there are some occasions when we vote on an application with the condition that should something change, for instance, should marijuana selling establishment switch from a timed system to a walk-in system, that under certain conditions they may be required to come back to the planning board to review that updated information. And I wonder if that might be a mechanism that would be an option for us here in lieu of an ordinance that is more clear on this point. I do not know. I'm just raising it for consideration.
Yeah, that's certainly something we can do. Is require them to come back if they do change a material issue like that. I mean, the other issue is just because the ordinance allows somebody to do certain things, if they make an application and we impose conditions that are narrower than what the ordinance requires, and they agree to build according to those conditions, we can do that. We do that all the time. So we might not necessarily have to. I would hope that if the applicant said we are committing to only a certain level and we're willing to put it into a condition and we're willing to put it into a covenant, that I think maybe having them come back if they choose to do it might be duplicative, but it's certainly something that we can and have done. Did anybody else have any comments or questions?
I have
yes,
a couple more, if I might, that are not related to lab use.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Thanks. This is actually one on, so this is still on the building. This is coming back from a comment that you guys made the last meeting, particularly around the retail use. I think you mentioned that you were planning that a couple of the retail spaces would be below market rate, which I think is great and would definitely help small businesses in the area and be very consistent with trying to, you know, keep small businesses within Davis and affordable. Is that anywhere in sort of your documents, or are there any covenants around that as well, or is that sort of just we intend to?
So that is specifically outlined in the development covenant currently.
Okay.
And it refers to the two retail bays on Elm Street.
Fabulous. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep, happy to.
And then the other question is actually around the tree that you have by the loading dock, actually. So you've kind of got one in this back corner of the building, yeah, B on the lower right here. Was this tree taken into account when you did your turn radius for the loading dock?
Yes. So the dock door is actually, there was at one point in time a man door there. And so we've gotten rid of the man door at the loading dock and put that tree in place. And so it does not have any, won't impede at all on the actual dock door in that loading area.
Okay. So basically the loading dock as designed would not, I mean, trucks wouldn't necessarily be clipping that tree B.
That's right. And there's also an alley area between the property line and the building that is faintly shown there. That's about 3 feet wide. And so the tree itself would actually kind of align right at the corner. And so a majority of it would be in the alley area. So it would not be clipping.
Okay. And then actually, while you have this up, last question on trees is you have these, I think they sweet gums, whatever, the tree C's along Herbert Street. Yeah, the black gum. Are those, what's going on with the power lines that currently exist above grade on Herbert? Are those getting buried or will they stay above ground?
We are working with Eversource currently to take those underground.
Okay. That alleviates my concern about the trees intersecting power lines. So thank you for the clarification. And maybe the last comment that I will have is on the planting palette for the understory on the civic space. So, for the public plaza, I should say. So Vinca is one of the ones that you called out as a understory plant. And I know it's not native, it is fast growing, has some things like that, but it can be quite a bully for native plants. And you know, as one member here, I would urge you to consider, you know, alternative natives that are creeping. I think there's, you know, did a quick check, there's like 21 shade tolerant, like deep shade tolerant ones in the native plant database that would not necessarily crowd out the other ground story or ground cover natives that you do have, and would probably help with a successful, you know, majority % native planting, you know, 5 years from now. Otherwise, you just end up with, you know, a whole bed of Vinca. So that's a comment, just to urge you guys to consider potentially 1 or 2 other native alternatives to that. And with that, I am all set. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time. I really appreciate it.
This is our time to discuss and to ask questions. And I see Amelia's hand, despite the fact that everybody squares.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had one additional question for the applicant, which is either now or in our next meeting. could you be prepared to speak to the plan for protecting the existing street trees at the edge of the plaza on Elm Street? I think those are larger and more significant public space trees.
All of those trees,
to be protected.
sure. All of those trees are scheduled to remain. And we are working through a construction logistics plan that would ensure that they are unharmed during the process, but they would remain.
But there's no additional detail on that plan as of yet?
It will be part of our full construction plan that would be submitted as part of the permit process.
Thank you.
Amelia, now that you bring that up, it reminds me of the project directly across the street. What the planning board had done in that case, for anybody that is unaware, is the planning board imposed a condition that basically required best efforts and work with PSUF in regards to any work in and around the street trees on Elm. There were a few across the street that were potentially at risk due to construction. The same will be true for these. So if the board is amenable, I would urge us to include that duplicate condition to this application, which doesn't obligate any specific issue outside of using best efforts and work with the appropriate city department, because basically, I'm not going to, we can't condition you to keep a dead tree up, right, or a sick tree, but we can ask you to do the best that you can. So I would encourage the board, when it's time for us to vote on this application, that we consider adding the condition language that we had for the other lab building directly across the street from this one. Does anybody else have things that they'd like to ask or comment on now? Let me move my thing to make sure I'm not blocking anybody's box here. Okay, seeing none, I want to thank the applicant very much, and Emily and Courtney for I think a really robust discussion on an important project. I'm going to keep the written record open until let me take the calendar here. Our next meeting is the 6th of April, so I will leave the written comment period open to noon on March 31st, by which point the planning board should have all of the testimony and the information I think we will want and need prior to moving forward on this application. So thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. I will give everybody the opportunity to go and watch some basketball. So with that, and remind me, Amelia, you're a Princeton person, right?
No, sir.
No, I thought you were for some reason. Oh, my bad. Never mind. They won in shocking fashion.
Already upset my bracket though. Yeah.
Oh, everybody's bracket messed up. And Furman, I don't even know Furman. So anyway, so the chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. Can I get a roll call vote, please? Emily?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. Were the Elm Street cases officially continued?
No, they weren't. I moved to continue the 2 Elm Street cases to the 6th, seconded by Amelia. Roll call on that, please.
Sorry, Michael Capuano?
Aye.
Amelia Aba?
Aye.
Aaron Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Debbie Howard Easton?
Aye.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Okay. Those items are continued. The chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. Roll call, please.
Michael Capuano?
Aye.
Amelia Aba?
Aye.
Aaron Gino?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Debbie Howe Easton,
Aye.
Luke Schuster.
Aye.
See everybody in a few weeks. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.